Subscribe before the truth disappears. Sometimes the missing page is the whole story. The radio squawked, then died beneath the weight of wind and sirens. On a late summer afternoon in 1982, a line of officers sprinted across a playground rimmed by cottonwoods, their boots thudding in a staccato rhythm that didn't belong to a place built for swings and laughter. Mothers stood in clusters, arms folded across their chests, as if their bones were the last barrier against a world that had shifted in one blind instant. A red plastic shovel lay on its side in the sand, its handle pressed with small half-moons. A boy with skinned knees cried into his sleeve. Somewhere, a dog barked and would not stop. Sergeant Walt Harrow knelt in the heat haze, his shadow falling long across a scatter of footprints. 3 shoe sizes at least. 2 small, 1 adult. The adult prints angled toward the parking lot, an arc through dry grass. No one raised their voice. Nobody wanted to say out loud what everyone already knew. The difference between an ordinary day and a story that would yank a town inside out existed in marks you could cover with your hand. He stood, eyes stinging from dust and the coppery bite of panic, and told the nearest patrol to lock down the streets. Someone had driven away from the playground, and that truth felt like a siren that didn't need electricity. There are years you can name by a news photo. In the weeks that followed, the photo was everywhere, a little girl's face framed by bangs and a summer smile, the kind of picture that didn't understand what would come next. Flyers blistered on poles in the dry heat, tips rattled through phone lines like buckshot. The state bent itself around a search that expanded and then contracted under the heavy hand of time. 3 weeks later, the same radios that had died in the August sun carried the words nobody wanted to imagine. A discovery, a family shattered, a case that imprinted itself like a watermark on every mother's voice when she shouted across a park, "Stay where I can see you." The investigation became a country of boxes, evidence cartons, statement binders, reels of tape with labels fading into the decade. Walt retired on a winter morning 10 years later with a file in his lap and a pressure in his chest that didn't belong to the altitude. The case drifted where cold cases drift, held in place by ritual and intention. Anniversaries, press conferences, new technologies arriving like ships at a harbor, each promising the same thing. None of them delivered it. 43 years after the shovel lay in the sand, Detective Mara Linden stood in the county record's basement and listened to the fluorescent lights complain. It smelled like paper and cooling dust, the perfume of places that survive because people forget they exist. A clerk named Addison glided between aisles with a librarian's patience, tugging a ladder into position with one hand and balancing a box with the other. You wanted Runyan, 1982. Primary evidence is upstairs in the vault, so this will be administrative. Memos, tip cards, call logs, warrant drafts, witness indexes, the boring stuff. Boring solves cases, eventually, Mara said. She had gray at her temples now, a calm voice, an easy stride that fooled people into telling her what they wouldn't tell anyone else. She set the backs on a steel table and peeled back the lid like she was opening a wound that had scabbed over wrong. Phone logs slid beneath her fingers, thumb blackened at the corners. An incident memo typed with the determination of a man stabbing a ribbon with each letter. Shift rosters labeled in ballpoint. Who searched which pasture? Who set the tip lines? Who drove the out-of-state plates list from one office to another before the era of instantaneous? The small hand of procedure turned and turned. Halfway down, she found a piece of twine. It was tied around a thin folder that shouldn't have been there. No sticker on the tab, no case number stamped along the edge, just twine. An ordinary knot you could teach a child. She looked at Addison. "Twine?" Mara asked. Addison made a face that liked answers. "Never seen that on our side. Evidence sometimes uses string when a seal breaks, but admin? Nah. Maybe someone grabbed a folder from the nearest desk in a hurry." Mara pulled the knot free. Inside lay a single-page memo, a faded pink carbon copy with a header that had bled into the years. Witness statement, intake, field. The date was 3 days after the abduction. Beneath it, a form filled in by hand. Name, H. Criswell. Age, 17. Location, 5th and Orchard, facing playground lot. Time, approximately 1:20 p.m. Vehicle, light blue sedan, late 70s, 2-door, primer on rear quarter panel. Partial plate, 2, 6-7-K, Utah. Notes: male driver, 20s to 30s, tan cap, dark mustache. Spoke to the child briefly. Child entered the vehicle willingly. Witness distracted by younger sibling. Driver departed eastbound on Orchard. At the bottom, a signature that looked like a heartbeat drawn with a ruler. SGTW Harrow. In the corner, a stamp half-smudged, received. No intake number, no scan date, no routing marks. Mara stood very still, the white noise of the light swelling like surf in her blood. "Addison," she said, a thread in her voice. "Yeah?" "Search the database for Criswell, any mentions tied to the Runyan case. Also any partial plates with a 2-7 and a K." Addison typed with speed that made the keyboard sound endangered. The monitor coughed up a long rectangle of nothing. "No Criswell," Addison said. "Plates? That partial would match thousands if you're stretching it across years, but in 82, local registrations with a 2-7K as the first sequence. Hang on," the clacking slowed. "Huh, that's weird. What?" "An old query card scanned in the 90s references a C27K hit, possible primer on a rear panel. But the follow-up field is blank. It says, see Supplemental Report 12B. There's no 12B in the scan manifest." Mara touched the twine again as if it could tell her a story. "Who logs these in?" she asked. "Back then?" Addison shrugged. "Whoever had hands. Admin assistant, sometimes a detective. You'll have a better answer upstairs in the vault. Chain of custody sheets for admin aren't as rigid as evidence." Addison grimaced. "I said that out loud, didn't I? That's how stuff goes missing." "How many boxes are in this case set?" Mara asked. 47, plus 2 that moved to overflow after the remodel in 03. We're pulling every box that even glances at supplemental reports and witness intake, and I want sign-out cards for this folder line. If someone tied twine around it, they didn't trust tape." Addison disappeared into the stacks like a diver, re-emerging with a second box, then a third. They built a paper city on the table. The clock in the far corner failed to tick. Time here belonged to paperwork. In the fourth box, under a stack of routing slips, they found a card the size of a postcard. File sign-out record in block print. Columns for date, badge number, purpose, and return. Half a dozen entries in faded ink. Detectives whose names lived like fossils in the department's old newsletters. Then a gap. Then one more entry. Ballpoint black, neat script, badge number perfectly legible. Date, 3/17/2003. Badge 4123. Purpose, courtesy review, consolidation. Return, blank. The return field was blank. The initials were 3 letters Mara knew like her own, WH, Walt Harrow. 10 years retired on that date. A courtesy review that removed a folder from the stream and did not return it. "Do we have badge rosters from 03? Mara asked, though she didn't need a roster to translate initials. Addison pulled a binder from the shelf and flipped until paper snapped. "Badge 4123, she read, Captain Walter Harrow, Cold Case Liaison, volunteer capacity. You already knew that." Mara pressed her tongue to her back molars, a habit that kept some words inside when they wanted out. The air down here smelled like a secret that learned to breathe. "Call records," she said. "I want contact info on a Harriet or Hannah Criswell. If she's still in state, I want to knock on her door before sundown. And I want Walt." Addison glanced at the sign-out card, then back at Mara. "He's, health hasn't been good. Lives with his daughter now out by the lake." "Then I'll bring coffee," Mara said. She copied the page with the partial plate and slid the original back into the twine-tied folder. She did not tie it closed. You don't reseal a thing that has already broken. The lake kept its calm even when the wind pushed. Only the reeds tattled, their brown heads flicking gossip as cars pulled into the circular driveway. The house was a single story with windows that looked west. Photos hung along the hall. Family at the state fair, a boys' baseball team lined like dominoes, a man in a uniform that had been out of style for 20 years but hadn't stopped meaning duty. Walt sat in a chair with a blanket over his knees and a paperback face down on the armrest. His hair had retreated into a ring, but his eyes were the same, pale blue, the color of a winter sky that refuses to commit to snow. He looked up when Mara entered and composed his face with an old habit. Neutral, available, nothing given away for free. "You found something," he said, before anybody had offered him coffee or politeness. A statement, not a question, the way veterans greet bad weather. "In your basement," Mara said, or ours, I guess. "Record storage. A witness intake from 3 days after the abduction. 17-year-old saw a light blue sedan with primer on the rear quarter, partial plate 27-K, driver with a tan cap and a mustache. Child got in willingly. You signed it, Walt." The air in the room changed shape, not colder, denser, as if more molecules had shown up to witness. "I signed a lot of paper," he said. "Which one do you want me to remember?" "The one tied with twine," Mara said softly. "No routing marks, no supplemental attached. In 2003, you signed it out. You didn't sign it back in." His hands tightened under the blanket. The tendons moved like wire. "In 2003, they pulled the case for consolidation. New scanners, new system. I ran interference, kept the narrative from getting chopped into parts by a machine that didn't know what it was reading. If I took something home, I brought it back." "It didn't come back," Mara said. She let the words sit the way detectives set a photo on a table and let a suspect stare at themselves for a minute. "We just found it, Walt. Twine and all. Someone kept it out of circulation for decades." He turned his head toward the lake, as if the lake might have an answer. "Then someone made an error," he said. "Addison found a card," Mara continued, "because she had decided to be the wind in a room where everyone else wanted to be water. A C-27K hit on a query, light blue car with primer on the rear quarter. It references a supplemental report 12B. That supplemental isn't anywhere in the manifest." She watched the old man's jaw. It ticked once. "If there was a 12B, it got separated or removed." "You think I buried it," he said, at last meeting her eyes. "That's why you're here." "I think something got buried," she said, "and I think we just dug a corner free." He looked back at the blanket. His thumbs rubbed together as if he was testing a knot. "You ever carry a box too long? You put it down for a minute and can't feel your fingers for an hour. That's this case." He exhaled. "Bring me what you have. Let me see if the paper can remember what I can't." Mara slid the pink carbon copy from her folder. He squinted at it. A tiny sound escaped his throat, something between a laugh and a cough. "I remember the kid," he said. "Teenage girl. Came in with her little brother still crying because his popsicle melted on his hands. She was shaking hard enough to blur her letters. Said she'd seen the car, said she had tried to tell somebody, and they told her the line was busy." He put the page down. His finger touched the partial plate like it could burn him. "I wrote it up. I swear to you. I wrote the supplemental. We canvassed every blue sedan with primer from here to the Idaho line, a dozen men with tan caps and worthless faces. None of it stuck." "Then where is 12B?" Mara asked. He didn't answer. His eyes drifted toward the hall, the line of frames, the two family photos where one picture sat ever so slightly crooked, as if someone had adjusted it in a hurry and didn't want to get caught. Mara followed his gaze. The crooked frame hung above a small built-in cabinet with a half-door. She pulled it open. Inside, stacked tight like books, were file folders bound with rubber bands that had fossilized. The smell that came up from the little wooden cave was the same as the record's basement, the aroma of paper that had learned to outweight men. On the top folder, a stamp, Runyan Sup, and beneath that, in Walt's block print, a number, 12B. When she slid the folder free, something thinner skittered loose and fluttered to the floor. A Polaroid, its colors softened by years, landed face up on the hardwood. It showed a light blue two-door sedan parked under a cottonwood, primer on the rear quarter, a corner of a plate in frame, 27K, and the last letter almost visible. Walt looked at the photo as if it had chosen that moment to come alive. His face went slack with the expression he must have banned from the job. Grief, mixed with relief. The way a man looks when a missing word returns to him too late. "I didn't hide it," he whispered. "I saved it. They wanted to box the case and move on. I thought I'd build it clean, bring it back when a new lieutenant would actually look. Then my heart went sideways, and the year got away, and..." He swallowed. "Open it." Mara broke the brittle band. The supplemental report was typed, neat, every field filled. A witness follow-up. A second teenage statement that sharpened the first. A canvas card stamped "Contact made" beside an address 3 blocks from the playground. And a final page, vehicle owner query, with a name and address that had been redacted with a marker, now faded to brown. The redaction wasn't complete. At the margin, the ink had bled. 2 letters ghosted through, pale as breath on glass. LT. And beneath the black, a surname beginning with H, the same first letter as the man in the chair. Mara lifted her eyes. Walt's face had gone as white as the lake in winter. "I didn't own a blue sedan," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I know who did." He closed his eyes like a man stepping into wind. "He worked with us. He wore the badge, and he signed my timesheets." The room shrank to the size of the page between them. Outside, the reeds bowed, whispering. The old photograph on the floor shivered in the draft of a story that hadn't finished with them. When they finally opened the locked cabinet, Mara thought, as her thumb slid the Polaroid back beside the report, everything changed.
The light in Captain Harrow's living room faded into the color of paper ash. Detective Mara Linden sat across from him, the Polaroid still in her hand. A silence thickened between them, the kind that belongs to the moment right before a confession or a lie. "Who?" she asked finally. Harrow's jaw tightened. "Lieutenant Charles Hennessy. He was my superior back then, oversaw the Runyan case when it first broke." The name hit her stomach like a stone. She'd seen it in the archives, scrawled across the top of several internal memos. Hennessy had retired in '89, died in 2004, but his signature lingered everywhere, like fingerprints on glass. Mara looked down at the photo again. The light blue car, the primer on the panel, the partial plate. "You're saying this was Hennessy's car?" Walt gave a slow nod. "He had one just like it. Same make, same model, same damn primer patch. Said he backed into a fence one winter, never got it repainted." "Did anyone run it?" "I did, quietly, before we logged the witness report. The plates didn't match the car. Registration was under his sister's name. That's why I wrote the supplemental, 12B. I knew if I didn't put it on paper, it would vanish before it existed." Mara leaned forward. "Then why hide it?" He looked at her with a steadiness that was almost defiant. "Because it was the '80s. You accuse a fellow officer, especially your commanding officer, and your career's over before you stand up from your chair. I thought I could hold on to it until something concrete surfaced, but it never did. Then the years went by, and I convinced myself it was a coincidence, that I'd imagined the whole thing." Mara exhaled slowly, trying to anchor her thoughts. "If this photo was taken in '82, who took it?" Walt hesitated. "That, I don't know. It came in through an anonymous drop, left in an evidence envelope with no return address. I logged it under supplemental materials, but never entered it officially. That's probably why the database lost it." "Anonymous drop," Mara repeated, her voice flat. "Could it have been the witness, Criswell? Maybe. Or maybe someone inside who didn't trust the system." A log burned quietly in the fireplace, filling the silence with the sound of settling wood. Outside, the light had gone completely gray. "Walt," she said finally, "if this ties back to Hennessy, even circumstantially, we need to reopen the file, officially." He gave a dry laugh that sounded like paper tearing. "You'll need more than a faded plate and a ghost report for that." "I'll start with the witness," Mara said. "If Harriet Criswell is still around, she might remember more than she told a scared sergeant 40 years ago." The Criswell house, Salt Lake City. The house sat on a quiet street lined with sycamores that looked as old as the neighborhood itself. Paint peeled from mailboxes, kids' bikes leaned against fences. It was the kind of place that aged alongside its stories. Mara parked across the street, letting the engine tick cool. She checked the notes Addison had pulled. Harriet Criswell, now 58, formerly a teacher, lives alone, no prior criminal record, found disconnected. She walked up the path, the crunch of gravel underscoring every step. When she knocked, it wasn't the sound of surprise that answered. It was the sound of someone who'd been waiting for the past to arrive. Harriet opened the door a few inches. Her eyes pale blue and clouded around the edges, studied Mara like she was a memory she hadn't decided to trust yet. "You're from the department," Harriet said softly. "Took you long enough." Mara blinked. "You were expecting me?" "I've been expecting someone for 40 years. She opened the door wider. "You better come in before the tea goes cold." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. Framed photographs lined the mantel, students, classrooms, summer picnics. Harriet poured tea with steady hands, her movements deliberate, as if routine was her defense. Mara set a small recorder on the table. "Miss Criswell, I'm revisiting the Runyan investigation. Your original statement mentioned a blue car, a man in a cap." "I know what I said," Harriet interrupted gently. "I've replaying that day more times than I can count. My brother was crying because he had dropped his ice cream. I turned around just long enough to see the man talking to her. He wasn't grabbing her, he wasn't yelling, he was smiling. Like he knew her. You told Sergeant Harrow she got in willingly." "She did, but it was how she looked at him that stuck with me. Like she recognized him. Like it wasn't the first time they'd spoken." Mara leaned forward. "Did you ever see him before that day?" Harriet hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Once, maybe a week before, the same car parked near the playground. He didn't get out, just sat there pretending to read a newspaper. I mentioned it to a neighbor. She told me I was overreacting." "Do you remember the license plate?" "Part of it. 27 and I think a K. I tried to give it to the officers later, but the man who came to take my statement said they already had the information. He told me not to worry." Mara frowned. "Do you remember that officer's name?" Harriet nodded, her eyes glassy. "Captain Hennessy." The sound of the name in someone else's voice froze the air between them. "You're sure?" "I'd never forget that face. He came to the door himself, told me I was brave to come forward. Then when I asked for a copy of my statement, he said they'd lost the paperwork. He said he'd handle it personally." Mara leaned back, the weight of the revelation tightening in her chest. "Miss Criswell, no one ever followed up on your statement. It wasn't entered into the official record."
Harriet gave a small, knowing smile, the kind of smile people give when their fear finally matches reality. "Then you've just found the reason I never left town," she said. "I knew they'd come back someday. Maybe not for me, but for what I saw." Back in her car, Mara recorded a note into her phone. "Witness confirms prior contact between suspect and victim. Confirms officer involvement in follow-up. Hennessy may have directly intercepted or suppressed witness intake. Reopen chain of command review." She closed her eyes. The sound of wind against the car roof felt almost like static. If Hennessy had buried a statement, then everything, the suspect profiles, the search parameters, the vehicle canvas, had been built on a lie. And someone, somewhere, had decided that lie was worth keeping. County Records, night. Addison was still at her desk when Mara returned, hair pulled back, surrounded by half-drunk coffee cups. "Tell me you've got something," Mara said. Addison pushed her glasses up. "I pulled Hennessy's personnel file, spotless, which is suspicious in itself. But there's something odd in his 1983 inventory log." She handed Mara a printed page. A column of signatures and item descriptions. Most were routine, firearms, reports, evidence logs. But halfway down, item number 214. Vehicle photo, color, 3x4, child abduction case, August 1982. Status: transferred to training division for demonstration purposes. Receiving officer:
Lieutenant C. Hennessy. Mara's throat went dry. He took the photo out of evidence? Addison nodded grimly, and never brought it back. Mara rubbed her temples, the beginnings of a headache blooming behind her eyes. Then how the hell did Walt end up with it? Maybe someone inside slipped it to him, Addison said. Someone who wanted it to survive. Mara stared at the record again, the small bureaucratic lie buried in plain sight, for demonstration purposes. Addison, she said, track down anyone from the old training division roster. If even one person remembers that photo, I want their statement. And Walt? Mara hesitated. He's holding pieces we still don't understand. Keep an eye on him, quietly. Addison raised her eyebrow. You think he's hiding more? Mara looked toward the darkened window. I think sometimes people guard the truth because it's the only thing keeping them alive. That night, as snow began to fall outside her apartment window, Mara laid the Polaroid on her desk and stared at it for a long time. The light blue car, the primer, the edges curling like time itself was trying to swallow it. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face hovering over the frozen image, the faint ghost of a detective chasing the shadow of another cop's conscience. She picked up her pen and wrote one line in her notebook. If the missing file changed the case, what happens when the truth changes the department? Then she underlined it twice, because the deeper she looked into the Runyan file, the clearer it became this wasn't just about a missing girl. It was about a system that learned how to bury its own guilt. And somewhere, inside that system, a man in a tan cap had never really disappeared.
The snow came hard that morning, the kind that fell without sound, the kind that made the whole world look like it was holding its breath. Detective Mara Linden's phone buzzed before dawn. It was Addison. You're going to want to see this, she said. An hour later, Mara was back in the records office, coffee in hand, as Addison pointed to a scanned memo glowing on the monitor. Training Division, 1983, Addison explained. Routine correspondence, boring on its face. But look who it's addressed to. At the top, faint but legible, Lieutenant Charles Hennessy for internal presentation, handling media in sensitive cases. Below it, stapled, a list of photographs requested for use in demonstration. Crime scene photos, vehicle surveillance, and one labeled Runyan Case Photo 12B, Vehicle Blue Sedan 27K Series. Wait, Mara said, her pulse quickening. That's our photo. Addison nodded. And there's something else. It was signed off by someone in the chain of custody, a captain's signature. The ink's faded, but it looks like Harrow's handwriting. Mara stared at the page, a chill slipping through her ribs. Walt gave it to him, she whispered. He handed it over. The snowplows hadn't come through yet. Mara's tires crunched across fresh ice as the lake came into view, gray and unmoving. Harrow's house sat on the hill, smoke trickling from the chimney like a pulse. He was waiting on the porch, bundled in a coat, as if he'd known she was coming. You found the memo, he said. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. You gave him the photo. Harrow's eyes drifted toward the lake. Not at first. He asked for it weeks later, said it would help during a press seminar, showing how evidence should be properly logged. I didn't think twice. Back then, you didn't question the brass. Mara climbed one step. Did you ever get it back? He shook his head. No, and when I asked, he said he sent it to archives. You believed him? I wanted to. His voice cracked. I was already in deep for questioning his handling of the case. The department called it undermining the chain of command. I figured losing one photo was a small price to keep my badge. Mara stepped closer, lowering her voice. Walt, the car in that photo, that was his, wasn't it? He didn't answer right away. The lake wind carried the sound of his breathing. I checked the make and year after you left, he said finally. A 1978 Buick Skylark. Same quarter panel damage, registered to his sister like I told you. She lived out near Ogden, died in 1985. The car was sold months later to a junkyard. Meaning whatever physical evidence it held is gone, Mara said quietly. Walt nodded. But it doesn't matter. There's something worse.
He went inside and returned with a small envelope, yellowed and brittle. Inside was a strip of contact prints, still frames from an old surveillance reel. One showed a man standing near the car, blurred but unmistakably wearing a tan cap. In another frame, just visible in the reflection of the car window, was the face of a uniformed officer. "You had this the whole time?" Mara asked. "I didn't know what I was looking at," he said. "Back then it was just one more ghost image in a pile of ghosts." Mara held the strip up to the light. The reflection, pale, grainy, looked back at her like a dare. It wasn't Hennessy. It was a younger Walt Harrow. By noon, the precinct was a hum of low voices and bad coffee. Lieutenant Krantz, head of internal affairs, sat across from Mara with a frown deep enough to have its own badge number. "You're saying Harrow's in the reflection?" Krantz asked. "I'm saying the man who took the witness statement might have been closer to the car than he ever admitted." Krantz drummed his fingers. "You're accusing a retired officer with heart trouble of tampering with evidence in a 40-year-old homicide? I'm saying he may not be the only one who did," Mara replied. "Every move in this case feels like two men protecting different versions of the same lie." Krantz leaned back. "What about motive?" She slid a file across the table, a background report Addison had compiled overnight. Hennessy was overseeing a narcotics task force in 1982. Guess who was assigned as his liaison in the community policing unit? Krantz flipped the page. Harrow. I think the sedan in the photo might have been a department vehicle temporarily assigned to them both. Krantz looked up, eyes narrowing, which means either man could have been behind the wheel that day. Exactly. And you're going to prove it how? I'm going to find out who signed the gas logs, Mara said. The storage shed behind the old county motor pool was half buried in snow. Addison had bribed the night custodian with donuts and charm to get them inside. Rows of ledgers lined the shelves, handwritten, smudged, some pages stuck together by time. Mara flipped until the dates matched August 1982. There it was. Vehicle ID 23BK, assigned to Lieutenant C. Hennessy, Sergeant W. Harrow. Fuel date, August 26th, 1982, 11:10 a.m. Signature, C. Hennessy. Destination, Orchard and 5th, Child Safety Patrol. Mara froze. That's the playground, she whispered. The same day, the same hour. If this is real, it puts him at the scene, Addison leant over her. Yeah, and Harrow too, if he signed off later. So which of them was driving? Mara closed the ledger slowly. Maybe that's the question the file was meant to erase. By the time Mara returned to Harrow's house, the sky had gone the color of steel. Walt sat by the window again, watching the water harden into ice. I need you to tell me the truth, she said, setting the ledger on his lap. You and Hennessy signed this vehicle out the day Rachael Runyan was taken. He didn't look down. We were running community patrols. We'd just finished a shift. At a playground? His voice wavered. We were supposed to pick up reports from a local unit. I remember coffee, I remember a call on the radio, then nothing clear after that. We split up. Hennessy took the car. He hesitated too long. Walt, if you were covering for him, I need to know why. He turned, the lines on his face deep as canyons. Because I thought he was helping the case. Because he said if I didn't, I'd ruin more lives than I'd save. What did he mean by that? But Harrow's expression had gone distant, eyes glistening with the kind of guilt that doesn't need language. Finally he whispered, because he wasn't alone in that car. Mara froze. He looked up at her. My son was with him, ride-along day. Hennessy told me it'd be good for the boy to see how police work really looked. I was in another car that afternoon. When the dispatch came through about the abduction, I called him. He didn't answer. Later he swore the kid hadn't seen anything, that he dropped him off before it happened. Mara's voice was barely a breath. Did you believe him? I wanted to, Walt said again. But my son never talked about it. He grew up quiet, moved to Idaho, changed his last name. What's his name now? He looked out the window. Chris Harlow. Mara's stomach dropped. She knew that name. It had appeared once before on an anonymous tip line submission from 2003. There's something you missed in the Runyan file. Look at the car. The call had never been traced.
The next morning, she was on the road to Boise. The snow followed her like static. She found Chris Harlow at a small mechanic shop off State Street, sleeves rolled up, grease smudged across his wrists. When she introduced herself, he didn't flinch. "I figured it'd be you," he said. "You called the tip line 20 years ago," Mara said. He nodded. "Didn't think anyone was still listening." "You were with Hennessy that day." His jaw tightened. I was 9. Dad thought it was a field trip. Hennessy stopped near the park, said he had to check something. I waited in the car. There was a little girl by the swings. He walked over, talked to her, she smiled, then they walked back. She climbed into the passenger seat. Mara's throat went dry. "And you said nothing?" "I didn't understand," he said quietly. "He told me she was lost and we were helping her find her mom. He drove for a while, then told me to get out and walk to the station down the road. Said he'd catch up. He never did. By the time I got home, the news was everywhere." He swallowed hard. "When I told my dad, he went pale, told me to forget what I saw, said I'd misunderstood. But I never did." Mara stared at him, the weight of 4 decades pressing against her lungs. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because the man who told me to forget wore the same badge I thought stood for truth," he said. 3 days later, the forensic lab logged a discovery, a sealed envelope recovered from the estate of Charles Hennessy's sister. Inside, an unlabeled cassette tape. Addison called Mara immediately. "You need to hear this." The playback was faint, the hiss of old tape filling the gaps between words. "He won't talk, Walt. You did the right thing. The car is gone, the photo's gone. Let the past stay buried. Nobody wins if this comes out." A pause. Then another voice. Harrow's. Quiet, breaking. "She was 3, Charlie. You can't bury that. You'll bury your own badge if you don't. Then I'll live without it." Static swallowed the rest. Mara stopped the tape. The 2 men, allies, enemies, both, had fought the same battle from opposite sides of their guilt. She looked at Addison. "We have enough to reopen the case, officially this time." Addison exhaled. "After 43 years. After too long," Mara said. Months later, as snow melted into the lake, Mara stood by the waterline near Walt Harrow's house. He'd passed quietly a week earlier, heart finally giving out. His daughter had called her to collect a box he'd left behind. Inside were photographs, press clippings, and the original twine-tied folder, now resealed. On top, a note in his shaky handwriting. For the record, the file was never lost. It was waiting to be found by someone who still believed. Mara folded the note and slipped it into her coat. The wind across the lake carried the faint smell of thawing pine. She looked toward the horizon, where fog still clung to the water. A case once thought frozen had melted, not into perfect justice, but into something quieter. Truth imperfect and heavy, but real. As she turned back to her car, her phone buzzed with a new message from the department. "Another cold case. Similar MO. Want you on it." She smiled faintly. Some files, she murmured, never stop rewriting themselves. And with that, she drove into the falling snow, the truth trailing behind her like a shadow that would never fade. If you thought this one was wild, wait for the next. Hit subscribe before the next file disappears.